This video is going to be pretty short, hopefully. I actually remember what video this is from, so I'm going to link it in the description. It was a bullcrappy, quote-unquote documentary about a school for people with autism, or quote-unquote autism, and all the different things that may or may not even be autism, because like someone said, well, actually that might have been another video, but like sometimes it's other stuff going on. I mean, the usual in the mental health system where something is labeled off as something it's not. But still, the point is, this is the usual documentary that is commonly seen in the Cash for Kids system, where they run around recording kids in these different Cash for Kids system placements where they're being labeled off as bad, crazy, and slow, and made to feel like they have issues and like they're just terrible people and all that usual stuff. Because like I said before, the mental health system branch of the Cash for Kids system pretty much is Munchausen by proxy. They create the issue by beating it into people's heads that they have all these problems that there aren't even tests for, and that they were basically just born this way, even though mental illness really comes from trauma. But they tell the person that they were just born this way and they'll always be this way. And so when you're under 18 in the Cash for Kids system, they're made to make you feel like the bad guy, and like your abuse situation, your trauma symptoms are your fault, and they make you feel like a terrible person. But then when you're 18 plus in the mental health system, they install a victim complex into you, and they make you feel like you can just use your made-up mental label as an excuse to run around doing whatever you want and treating people like crap and all that. Out of all the comments, this comment and all the replies to it specifically stuck out to me. This kid said, "My brother and I have autism, Asperger's to be exact. We also have the appropriate medication to handle it." And then the comments, they're an example of something that I've mentioned before, and that I've also seen people mention a lot back when I used to be in support groups. And so what I want seeing someone say in a support group is that the thing about labels, especially the quote-unquote medication part, are really drugging people on neurotoxin drugs that actually cause mental illness, a chemical imbalance, neurological issues, and physical issues that all eventually lead to death. It's really not about how the person with the label feels. It's about the people around the person, who are usually abusers, because they're usually the ones traumatizing the kid and making them gain the quote-unquote issues that they have anyway. But it's about making the other people around the person feel comfortable. An example is the quote-unquote bad black boy with ADHD label. So what this would be is like, I'm trying to think of an example. So he likes to sing a lot. This is common with the quote-unquote bad black boy with ADHD label. He likes to sing, and he likes to write music and all that. And people are tired of hearing him sing. And so, since they want him to be quiet because he's annoying his mom or his teacher or whatever, they drug him on the neurotoxin, crack, cocaine, heroin, neurotoxins, psychotropics, specifically Adderall or Ritalin. And then it messes him up really bad to where he's like a zombie and he's zoning out. He won't talk, and this also commonly makes people just stare off into space pretty much, and they don't want to hear any noise. They won't be able to eat because they'll lose appetite, because psychotropics are made to turn off neural pathways and make the body work so he won't feel hunger. They'll even sit there and pee on themselves all day and end up having to wear diapers. And of course, while all this is going on, the abusive teachers, which of course they work for the Cash for Kids system, and then the abusive parents, which is usually probably going to be a Jezebelic, narcissistic single mom. Sometimes there is like a dad around, but usually it's either in these situations, this specific situation, it's usually a single mom who's narcissistic, and then the dad is like, sometimes he's around, sometimes he's not, but it's either that or a single mom who didn't have a dude to tell her that this is just how some boys are, really just how some kids are in general. Because commonly, these systems, when the mom isn't specifically abusive, they just know how to get over on a single woman who doesn't really know any better and convince her that there's something wrong with all her kids. So it's not even always that the mom is abusive, but single moms are easily tricked by these systems a lot of the time. And it kind of goes along with this verse that I like to mention a lot. I don't even remember exactly which one, but I know it's in 2 Timothy, and these are the type that speak into houses of silly women laden with sin, and that's exactly what the Cash for Kids system does. So, I mean, honestly, that's what a lot of people do, which leads to bad, traumatizing situations, but still, the Cash for Kids system does that specifically. So anyway, the mom, at least if she is abusive, she'll be saying the same thing that the teacher would be saying, which is that he's finally getting quote unquote better and his quote unquote behavior is in check now that he's on quote unquote meds. And they'll be saying that it's working well because, of course, even though a label of a quote unquote sickness is supposed to make you think about how the person is doing and how the person feels about their own condition, supposed condition, for whatever reason, these labels are always made about all the people around the person, which is commonly seen in support groups where I really feel like they're really filled with Munchausen women anyway. But in support groups, it's commonly a whole bunch of people talking about like their kid having some disorder and about how bad it makes them feel. And they never once mention how the kid feels. Like I remember there was this one post I had seen in a support group, one that my mom would actually get in, where the lady was talking about how her son's dad cut his hair. It was a whole bunch of weird mess. And she was talking about how beautiful her son looked, and it was just weird. And didn't really, she just didn't care about how her son felt about getting his hair cut. That's one example. It doesn't really have anything to do with the label. I don't even really remember what the label was, to be honest. But her son supposedly had something. And of course, when the mother is psychotic, they treat the children, because obviously she was psychotic to even be making that weird emotional incest type post she was making about her son that was like 5 or something. But anyways, that's an example of this. And of course, in the end, the kid ends up actually having issues from all the brain damage and the years of being forced on all these different neurotoxin drugs that cause all these issues. And they either end up becoming a drug addict, end up committing the crime, and get locked up in prison or jail or whatever. Or they end up dying from the drugs or whatever else. So yeah, anyway, this comment is a kid who obviously didn't understand that they were just being made to feel like there was just something so terribly wrong with them that they needed quote unquote meds. And so people in the comments who have the same label and accept the label, who actually have parents who aren't abusive and drugging their kid on neurotoxin drugs, were confused about what this kid even meant by quote unquote medication, because there is no meds for autism. And these kids weren't even made to feel like they had an issue that needed to be treated or cured. That's why I also say that having a label from an abuse situation and like from trauma symptoms from an abuse situation, because mental illness comes from trauma, while like living with your abusers. Wait, no. Is this coming out right? I think it is. Having a label with abusive parents and relatives is different from having a label about not being in an abuse situation. I'm honestly not sure if that made any sense at all, but this would probably make more sense. So when I was still in my Munchausen by proxy situation, which of course when you're in a narcissistic family system and you're the scapegoat or one of the scapegoats, you're always going to be made to feel like you're the bad, crazy, slow one anyway, because the narcissistic family system has to have someone to blame for the generational curses that they've been voluntarily pushing along, and they have to have someone to blame for all the issues in the family anyway. So if you're the scapegoat / the anointed prophetic, and then now there's a whole bunch of carnal terms like empath and chosen one. I don't like that one. That one sounds weird. And all these different terms that they have now. But if you're the scapegoat or the anointed / prophetic one, you're always going to be labeled as bad, crazy, and or slow anyways. So, yeah. What people would tell me when I was still in my Munchausen situation is that it's not even just about the labels, it's also about the situation. And if I wasn't in an abusive situation where I was being taken advantage of and exploited with all the different Munchausen labels, if I wasn't in that type of situation, none of the labels would even matter anyway, because nobody would really care if I supposedly had ODD or quote unquote Tourette's, which I didn't have. But of course, when you're in Munchausen situations with a narcissistic family system, they're always going to throw a whole bunch of random labels at you that you obviously don't have. But they were like, nobody would have even cared if you had any of that stuff anyway. It's just the fact that you're even in a situation that's where you're being exploited and taken advantage of by abusers that makes these labels be able to be used against you. Although, of course, there's all this stigma around different labels anyway, regardless, because, like I always say, the mental health professionals make the stigma, but for whatever reason, people with labels who accept their labels don't want to accept that, and they want to blame movies and TV shows for making stigma around different labels, but that's a whole other story. And either way, at the end of the day, mental illness comes from trauma. But yeah, so that's kind of what I meant when people learn in abuse situations, especially when it comes to this specific label of autism. When you're not in an abuse situation where the autism label is either there to cover up your trauma symptoms or whatever, or it's just being used to make you feel like the bad guy. Dang, what was I saying? When you're not being exploited, it doesn't matter. That's the point, because this is not coming out right. Just like how I used to point out, I think on the evidence channels, I don't know if I really went in detail on this here, but I used to point out that, like, if a kid gets a mental illness, because of course mental illness comes from trauma, if a kid gets mental illness from somebody who isn't a relative or a family friend that everybody's trying to cover up for, then the kid would actually be able to get treated for the issue and actually go to therapy and not have relatives keeping the kid from saying certain stuff in therapy or making the kid seem like they're the cause of all the issues in the family. It's kind of like that too. So, like, a girl gets, or a boy, whoever, I don't know, a kid gets sexually abused by their teacher. Since the teacher isn't a relative or a family friend, the family is less likely to try to, like, cover this up and cover up the kid's trauma symptoms. So the kid becomes bipolar because of what happened to them, because of sexual abuse. The family is actually going to care about the kid and their issues that they got from that, and actually let them go to therapy and talk about how they feel about the situation. And the kid doesn't have to worry about their label being used to get them put in some torture placement, like a TTI or something, in the Cash for Kids system. They don't have to worry about being made to feel like the bad guy, or like their trauma symptoms are their fault, like the usual kid in the Cash for Kids system, or in the mental health system branch of the Cash for Kids system. So that's also another somewhat, I ran out of recording time, but I said somewhat similar example. Now that I said all that, I'm going to actually start reading the screenshots, which I guess I'll just read this over. My brother and I have autism, Asperger's to be exact. We also have the appropriate medication to handle it. And then this person said, what does the medication do you? Which I guess that's supposed to mean, what does the medication do for you? Then somebody said, medication, question mark. And then the original commenter said, do for me, you mean? And then they said, yes, medication. What medication can you take for autism? Question mark, question mark. And then someone said, I do too. And then someone said, I was diagnosed with Asperger's in my early 20s, but I don't need or take medication. Why on earth would I need medication for something that isn't an illness? Oh, this is one thing I'll say about people with labels who accept the label. What they seem to not get is that the mental health system sees all these different people with all these different labels the same. They see all of you as bad, crazy, and slow. I don't know why people get this idea that mental health professionals, specifically psychiatrists and stuff, don't see them as somebody with a quote-unquote illness, but that's kind of another topic. And then someone said, my brother is 13 years old, noticed with PDD autism. I don't know if PDD stands for personality disorder, but I really don't know what that means. But I don't believe he's autistic. Before a couple weeks, I met my cousin who lived religious life that describes as one who doesn't inhibit his child's, whatever that really means. But I think I kind of understood what this comment meant, which is why I screenshotted it. He said to me that my little brother was damaged by, oh, I can't even say that word on here, and it affects him in the nervous system. My brother's behavior different from the autism I know because I volunteered for 4 years in a place that combined autistic people and quote-unquote normal people after afternoon to play with them. I want to know the truth about my brother and afraid to know my parents hide from me these things. So I don't really know. I was thinking maybe the person was saying that like they really just feel like their brother got trauma from somewhere and it's being covered up as autism, or if he just feels like his brother had ended up getting issues from the medical system and nobody really wants to admit what's going on. But I kind of already have a video where I mentioned this, and how people with the autism label who accept the label for some reason find this as some type of insult whenever someone mentions processed foods or any of that stuff causing autism, and then they'll go on rants about how autism isn't an illness, even though they let somebody diagnose them with the autism label, which the person who diagnosed them, the doctor, see it as illness, of course, because if it was seen as quote-unquote normal, there wouldn't be a name for it anyway. Hopefully I'm saying this right, but it's just really weird how people are when it comes to these labels and stuff. It just, a whole bunch of victim complex stuff, to make a long story short. It's just all really weird to me. Because, like, obviously, these things are caused by something, if they're really an issue, which, of course, the reason that there's even a name for it, and it's even called a developmental disorder, is because the doctors see it as a disorder. And I don't know what it is with people in the autism community that like to act like other people are saying it's a disorder, and act like TV shows and media are the ones making stigma about it, as if the mental health professionals aren't the ones saying that it's a disorder and making the stigma. I really don't know what's wrong with a lot of people, to be honest, when it comes to this victim complex protective group type stuff, but it's honestly all kind of annoying. They just may have not really been made to feel like mental health professionals really feel the way that they actually do about these issues, because they may have had non-abusive parents who protected them from seeing the truth about the mental health system or the whole cash for kids system as a whole, and how they really feel about anybody with these labels that they make up off the top of their head. So, like, somebody with the, I don't know, I'm thinking of an example, the ADHD label, who doesn't have abusive parents, who were using it against them and using it to cover up trauma symptoms, which of course ADHD usually comes from trauma anyway, but still, somebody who didn't have abusive parents or whatever, maybe got it genetically or something like that, isn't going to know how much kids with the ADHD label are really tortured and called bad in the Cash for Kids system because they actually have someone to protect them. So they may feel like it's not really a disorder or whatever because they didn't get to see how mental health professionals and the other Cash for Kids system staff really feel about this label or other labels. So because they didn't have abusive parents, they didn't have to get thrown into alternative schools or some sped placement or whatever because they have parents to protect them from that, so they don't know how these professionals that they look up to so much really feel about them. Hopefully that was a good explanation. But yeah, so kind of goes back to this comment that I used in another video where someone said it's funny how the more we focus on mental illness, the more mentally ill society becomes. Because of course, the real goal is to normalize people being messed up anyway, which I talk about all the time. That's why now, if you talk about like what may cause bipolar disorder or something, like how that's really caused by sexual abuse, then somebody may say you're stigmatizing bipolar and you're making it seem like something's wrong with us, even though the mental health professionals are the real ones saying that something's wrong with you. I don't even know where people's minds are really at these days. But people are really confused and brainwashed and just ignorant to a lot of stuff. I just don't know what to say about it, but people are just really, I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it anymore. Autism isn't something that needs to be treated or cured. You shouldn't need medication for autism. I'm autistic and I feel bad for you if you think you need medicine to change yourself. Now, if the medicine is for something like anxiety or depression, which autistic people often have, that's different. Even though antidepressants actually lead people to, I don't even know if I can say that word, but they lead people to unalive themselves and they cause anxiety. In fact, they cause something worse than just the usual depression. They cause anhedonia and melancholy. But I guess nobody wants to talk about that. Where was I? Then the medicine is probably a good thing if it helps with anxiety or depression. And then this person, the original commenter, said, I don't think you quite understand what I'm trying to say. The real issue with this whole situation is that the kid can't come to grips with the fact that they're being drugged because their parents just want them to be quiet and they're tired of their quote-unquote issues. And then this person said, what are you trying to say? And then I'm pretty sure after this, the kid just stopped responding. And it's still a sad situation because I bet after this, they went back to their parents and said, why do you have me on quote-unquote meds? Why are you telling me I need meds when other people are saying that they have the same quote-unquote problem, but their parents start forcing them to take meds? So why do I need meds then? And that conversation may or may not have happened. Of course, I wouldn't know, but I'm just saying this kind of seems like the situation that would make a kid, because they seem pretty young, it seems like the type of situation that would make a kid want to go back to their parents and ask them about why this is happening and want to know the real truth of what's actually going on. And it's still really sad. But yeah, psych drugs are not that far removed from street drugs. I feel like not that far removed is kind of like a weird choice of words. But I added this in because it kind of goes over a little explanation of the different drugs. And of course, something that I always say is that people who are on benzos like Xanax or who are on ADHD pills don't like to admit that they're on psychotropics because, psychotropics / antipsychotics, because they feel like their issue is seen as less bad, but really you're all seen the same by mental health professionals and you're all seen the same by people who work in the Cash for Kids system. They see everybody with either label as bad, crazy, or slow, because of course that's how the cash for kids system works, by profiting off of traumatized kids, either with abusive parents or no parents at all. And so, yeah, and like I said before, it's just like how the Puerto Ricans think they're better than the Mexicans, and the Dominicans think they're better than the Puerto Ricans, or like how the Jamaicans think they're better than the Africans, stuff like that. That's what this reminds me of, the whole meta label semantics, where people will be like, well, I'm not on psychotropics, even though psychotropics are really any drug, regardless of the category, because they all fall under the category, any drug that a mental health professional or cash for kids system staff is going to give you when they say you have some quote-unquote issue. That's what a psychotropic drug is. Doesn't have anything to do with whether you actually have psychosis or not, because, apparently most psychotropics are made originally for people with schizophrenia and then sometimes bipolar, but they're still used on hundreds of different things. So, yeah, anyway. Yes, they love street drugs when they profit from them. They condemn them when they don't. Adderall and Ritalin and are amphetamines, just as speed, coke, and crack. It is oxycodone, which is basically the same as heroin. Substitution as Subutex is just controlled high-potency opioids with long duration. Xanax is a benzo, and even worse when it comes to addiction than antipsychotics, which I highly condemn for other reasons, especially long-term side effects. And that's something that I learned when I was in the Cash for Kids system, because there was this kid in there who was 15, and they had him on Xanax. What I learned is that Xanax is more addictive than other psychotropics, which Xanax is commonly given to people for quote-unquote depression, but really just for kids being upset about being in an abuse situation, and then they get told that they're depressed. So yeah, it's more addictive, and it has less extremely deadly side effects than other psychotropics. So like other psychotropics, you get on them, well, they all cause metabolic syndrome, except the ADHD pills commonly make people lose their appetite and then end up really malnourished and skinny. But the rest of psychotropics will cause metabolic syndrome, which will give you diabetic weight and also make you have more of an appetite. But Xanax... Wait, what was I saying? I don't even remember exactly what I was saying. Oh yeah, the other psychotropics. They commonly give out the turn out the bowel side effect, which is caused by the fact that all these drugs are made to turn off neurotransmitters that make the body work. And so in most psychotropics, they'll turn off the bowels, and then you'll be told you're just quote-unquote constipated, and that can eventually lead to death. But it seems like Xanax doesn't really have the turn out the bowel side effect like that, and sometimes ADHD drugs don't either. That's what I learned when I was in the Cash for Kids system. The thing is, all drugs are pharmakeia, and all drugs are bad. Stop thinking that because it's prescribed to you that means it's necessarily good. Because honestly, the only real meds that were ever really good were the natural herbal ones. And you'll see that a lot of people these days are running back to naturopaths and stuff and herbalists, because the new age medical systems aren't there to treat anybody anyway. And they're actually messing people up and refusing to help people. You can literally run around chronically ill with an obvious condition that's easily diagnosed for years, and doctors will play games with you and gaslight you, and they'll send people off to the mental health professionals, which is a common story that are told by people who either almost died or have family members to die from some serious illness. And it's like, the medical system isn't there to help, to be truthfully honest. And these new drugs that are synthetic and made out of all this weird, crazy stuff that's killing people isn't good for you. And also another thing that I used to always say, especially when I first made this channel at 14, before the whole thing happened a little while after that, where CPS had CPS snitched to my relatives about the videos and got most deleted. I actually used to have a video on here with the statistics about how more Americans die from psychotropic drugs than illegal drugs. And there's also the fact that these same drug addicts that people are calling worthless, these are the same people who are pushed to the dumb cash for kids system and thrown on all these drugs, and then they ended up addicted to the drugs. So the same drugs they're doing on the street, they were being forced to take when they were a kid, but nobody had an issue when they were forced to take the drugs when they were a kid. That's the thing. People should be against all drug use. It should be bad for somebody to drug a kid to the point that they become addicted and end up homeless, addicted to drugs anyway, because these are the same drugs. The thing is, the government just doesn't like when they're not making money off of drugs. That's the issue. And that's why, well, honestly, there's a lot of stuff with why drugs are banned in certain places. There's a lot of racial stuff with that too, but still. The first time I tried to read this, I messed up really, really bad. So now I'm going to try again. Larissa may or may not be how that's pronounced, / pregabalin is a kinda weird new mixture between opioids and benzos. They prescribe it quite often nowadays. That sounds so country. It reminds me how people are saying I sound, because people claim I sound like Sandy Cheeks, but I don't think that's true. I hope that's not true. But anyway, nowadays for anxiety, they love to tell people it's not addictive.